I had the last box loaded into my truck when I knocked on Elena's door to tell her I was relocating. 2 weeks, I said. New job 3 states over. I wanted you to hear it from me before the sign went up in the yard. She didn't say congratulations. She didn't even step back from the doorway. She just crossed her arms and said, "Not before you hear this." That stopped me on her porch steps with my keys still in my hand. That was Elena Marsh, 31. A physical therapist with sharp green eyes and a habit of humming under her breath whenever she was buying herself time to think. She was humming now. And me? I'm Daniel Ross. I was 34, a general contractor who'd spent 6 years reading blueprints for other people's houses and somehow missed every sign in my own driveway. Elena wasn't just my neighbor. She ran our HOA board, the one signature standing between me and a clean closing on my house. Official paperwork, not poetry, the kind of woman you filed noise complaints with, not the kind you thought about at midnight. I read houses for a living. Structural loads, weight-bearing walls, which parts could move and which parts would bring the whole thing down if you touched them wrong. I had never once thought to ask myself the same question about her. "You've got 2 weeks," she said, "and you're going to spend at least one evening of it letting me finish a sentence." Before I could answer, her front door swung wider and her teenage nephew leaned out, phone in hand. "Aunt Elena, are you seriously doing this on the porch?" He didn't wait for an answer. He just shook his head, muttered something about old people drama, and disappeared back into the house, the screen door clapping shut behind him. Elena didn't even flinch. Tyler's 17. He thinks everything before 9 p.m. is a crisis and everything after is a nap. He's not wrong that this looks like a crisis. It's not a crisis. She stepped back from the doorway, just enough to let me see past her into the front hall, where a stack of HOA binders sat on the entry table like they always did, color-coded, alphabetized, the most Elena thing I'd ever seen. "It's a conversation you're not getting out of by loading a truck." I looked down at my keys, still warm from my pocket. "I've got a walkthrough at 4. Then we'll be quick." I didn't move. 3 years of nodding at her over the fence, of signing whatever form she slid under my door about lawn height or trash bin placement. And not once in that whole stretch had she looked at me the way she was looking at me now. Like she'd been rehearsing this on her own porch steps the same way I'd rehearsed my announcement in the truck. "Come in," she said. "Or don't. But say it out here and Mrs. Halloran 2 doors down is going to have the whole street relocating you by dinner." That got me moving. I followed her into the front hall, past the binders, into a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and coffee gone cold an hour ago. On the windowsill above her sink sat a terracotta pot, the plant inside it leggy and a little wild, reaching sideways toward the light. "You still have that thing," I said, nodding at it. "It's rosemary, Daniel. It doesn't die easy. You gave me one just like it 3 years ago, the day I closed on the house. I give one to everybody who closes on this street. It's not sentimental, it's tradition." She crossed her arms again, the same stance from the porch, like she needed the barrier of her own elbows between us. "Is yours still alive?" "Actually, yeah." "Ha!" She said it like she hadn't expected that, like she'd filed me under kills everything eventually. "I would have guessed you let it die in the first month. I moved it around the kitchen for the light. Talked to it sometimes. Felt insane about it." Something almost like a smile touched her mouth before she caught it and put it away. "That's the most interesting thing I've learned about you in 3 years. And you're telling me on your way out the door. I didn't think you paid attention to me. I pay attention to everyone. It's the job." "Is it the job right now?" She didn't answer right away, and the silence sat between us longer than a silence usually gets to sit between neighbors. I watched her decide something the same way I'd watch a client decide whether to trust me with a structural estimate, turning it over, checking it from every angle before committing. "Sit down," she said finally. "I'll make more coffee. The stuff on the stove is a war crime at this point. I really do have a 4 o'clock. Then we've got 2 hours, and I intend to use 15 minutes of it properly." She was already moving, pulling the old pot off the burner, rinsing it out with the brisk efficiency of a woman who ran quarterly board meetings the way other people ran marathons. "Sit." I sat. The kitchen chair wobbled slightly under me, one leg shorter than the others, and I caught myself running a hand along the underside of the seat out of pure habit, the way I checked every uneven surface I ever sat on. "This has been loose for a while," I said. "I know. I keep meaning to deal with it. You run an entire board that fines people for crooked fences, and you've got a wobbly chair in your own kitchen. Physician, heal thyself. I'm aware." She set 2 mugs down, the coffee not even close to ready, more a stall tactic than a beverage plan. "I fix everyone else's problems for a living, Daniel. Mine tend to wait." "That sounds exhausting." "It's manageable." She said it fast, the way people say things they've said so many times the words have worn smooth. I turned the chair leg over in my head anyway. An old habit, the contractor in me unable to leave a structural problem alone once I'd noticed it. "I've got shims in my truck. Takes 2 minutes. You don't have to fix my chair on your way out of town." "I want to." She looked at me a second too long, like the offer had landed somewhere she hadn't braced for. "Fine. 2 minutes." I went out to the truck, found the shims in the toolbox behind the driver's seat, came back in, and knelt down under her kitchen table like it was the most normal thing in the world for a man to be doing on the day he told a woman he was leaving the state. She stood close by, close enough that when I reached up to test the leg, my hand brushed against her ankle where she'd crossed one foot behind the other, and she went still in a way that told me she'd noticed it too. "Sorry," I said, not moving right away. "It's fine. Elena." "It's fine, Daniel." Her voice had gone quieter. "Finish the chair." I finished the chair. 2 minutes, like I said. A shim wedged tight under the short leg until it sat level and solid on her kitchen floor. When I stood up, she was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not the brisk efficiency. Something closer to the way she'd looked at that rosemary plant. Surprised it had survived this long without her checking on it. "There," I said. "Fixed. You fix things for a living." I don't know why that surprises me. It's not the fixing. It's that you let me. She didn't have an answer for that, or she had one and wasn't ready to say it, which with Elena I was starting to understand were often the same thing. She busied herself pouring coffee that still wasn't fully brewed, handing me a mug that was more heat than liquid. "So," she said, 3 states over. "What's the job?" "Restoration work. Big firm out of Charleston. They want somebody who can read old bones in a house and know what's worth saving." I turned the mug in my hands. "It's a good job." That wasn't a real question. I asked what the job was. I didn't ask if it's good. "You think it's not?" "I think you decided to leave 2 weeks after your divorce finalized. And I think you've been staring at real estate listings on your porch at 11 p.m. for about a month. Because my kitchen window faces your porch and I notice things. It's the job." I set the mug down slower than I meant to. "You've been watching me. I've been aware of you. There's a difference, and don't make it sound worse than it is. That's not the same thing, and you know it." She looked at me over the rim of her mug, green eyes sharp in the kitchen light, and for the first time since I'd known her, Elena Marsh looked like she didn't have an immediate, board-approved answer ready. "No," she said quietly. "It's not." Behind me, out on the street, a car door slammed hard enough that we both turned toward the window. A silver sedan had pulled up in front of her house, and a man in a golf polo was already climbing out with the kind of purposeful stride that meant trouble had arrived early. "Who's that?" Elena's whole posture changed, the guardedness sliding back over her like a shutter coming down. "Harold Pruitt," she said. "Board treasurer. And whatever he's here about, it is absolutely not going to wait until you've finished that coffee." Harold didn't knock so much as announce himself. 3 sharp raps that rattled the storm door in its frame. Elena crossed the kitchen before I'd even stood up all the way, and I heard her voice shift the second she opened the door. Brisker, flatter, the version of her I recognized from board meetings. "Harold, this isn't a great time." "It's never a great time with you, Elena. That's how I know it's usually the right time." His eyes found me over her shoulder. "Daniel Ross. Didn't realize you two were visiting." "He's my neighbor, Harold. Neighbors visit. It's not a scandal." "Nobody said scandal." He smiled the way certain men smile when they've already decided what story they're telling. "I actually came about your closing, Mr. Ross. There's a hold on it." That got my attention fast. A hold. Since when? Since this morning. Turns out there's a question about whether your buyer's financing meets the covenant requirements for owner occupancy. I'll need Elena's sign-off to release it, and given the circumstances, I think it's fair to ask whether she's the right person to be making that call. Elena's jaw tightened. The covenant requirements are met. I reviewed the file myself 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, you weren't having coffee with him at 10 in the morning. Get out of my doorway, Harold. I'll bring it to the full board Thursday, he said, already backing off the porch, already smug about it. Wouldn't want anyone saying you rushed a favor for a friend. He was gone before either of us said anything else. Elena stood in the open doorway for a long moment before she shut it. And when she turned around, something in her face had cracked open just slightly. That man has been trying to find a reason to sideline me off this board since the day I got elected over his preferred candidate, which happened to be his nephew. She sat down across from me. Hard. You know what's funny? I used to think if I was thorough enough, careful enough, if I never gave anyone a reason to question me, eventually it would stop being a fight. It never stopped being a fight. She wrapped both hands around her mug. My ex used to say I ran our relationship the way I run this board. Everything documented, everything defensible, nothing left to chance. He didn't mean it as a compliment. He meant I was exhausting to be loved by, because I never let anyone just have me without a plan attached. He left, eventually, for someone who didn't need an agenda to feel safe. And the worst part isn't that he left. The worst part is I understood exactly why he did, and I still couldn't figure out how to be any other way. She looked up at me. So when you say I let you fix my chair, Daniel, you have no idea how rare that is. I don't let people fix things for me. I fix things so nobody has the chance to leave me holding a problem I didn't see coming. The kitchen was quiet except for the coffee maker ticking as it cooled. I thought about my own version of the same wound, and how strange it was that the two of us had spent 3 years nodding at each other over a fence without either one saying the true thing out loud. You didn't fix Harold's mess by being convenient, I said. You fixed it by being right. There's a difference, and it sounds like nobody's told you that in a while. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something because I have a feeling you already have an opinion forming. If someone spent years being the thorough one, the reliable one, the one nobody worried about because she never gave them a reason to, do you think that kind of steadiness is a wall keeping people out? Or is it love that never got shown the right way? I'd genuinely love to hear where you land on that, because I think this little corner of the internet understands that particular kind of quiet strength better than most places online. If stories like Elena and Daniel's are the ones that stay with you, I hope you'll stick around. We tell a lot of them, and I like having people in the comments who actually think about this stuff instead of just watching it pass by. Daniel, she said quietly, I need you to know something before Thursday happens, before this gets complicated in a way neither of us can walk back. Okay. I've thought about you as more than a neighbor for longer than I'm comfortable admitting. I told myself it was inappropriate, given the board, given the closing, given every reason a careful person collects to talk herself out of the one thing she actually wants. She set the mug down. I'm done being careful about that particular thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about the job you already accepted 3 states away, but I needed you to know it wasn't nothing. Whatever this was, it wasn't nothing. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine, and she let me. It's not nothing, I said. It hasn't been nothing for a while. 3 years of noticing you find me for a fence stain and still looking forward to seeing you do it. That's not nothing either. I just didn't have a name for it until this morning. She looked up at me and I leaned in slow enough that she had every chance to stop it, and she didn't. Her hand came up to my jaw first, steadying, like she needed to be sure before she let herself have it. And then she kissed me like a woman who'd spent 4 years being careful, finally deciding one thing didn't require a plan. We broke apart slow. That complicates Thursday considerably, she said, a little breathless. I don't care about Thursday. You will when Harold brings a photo of my porch light being on until midnight 2 nights this month as evidence. I laughed, and it surprised both of us. Let him. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the screen lighting up with HOA group chat. Urgent, and her face changed the second she read the first line. Harold didn't wait for Thursday, she said slowly. He just sent something to the entire board right now. The message wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Asterisk in light of recent developments regarding board member conduct and a potential conflict of interest involving an active covenant review. I'm requesting Elena Marsh recuse herself from all pending decisions effective immediately, including the Ross closing. Full board vote Thursday at 7 p.m. Asterisk. He'd attached a photo, her porch light, taken from the sidewalk across the street, timestamped 11:40 at night, 3 days earlier. The night I'd stayed late fixing her storm-loosened fence gate after the wind knocked the hinge out. Something I hadn't thought twice about at the time because it had taken 20 minutes and she'd made me a sandwich after. That's not evidence of anything, I said. It doesn't have to be evidence, Daniel. It has to be a question. That's all Harold's ever needed. She set the phone down like it had gotten heavier in her hand. For years of never giving him a single real thing to point at, and he's going to take me down with a photo of a porch light. He's not taking you down. You don't know that. You'll be in Charleston by the time the vote happens. That landed somewhere I hadn't braced for either. I haven't left yet. You have a truck full of boxes. I have a truck full of boxes in 2 weeks. And I am not spending the last 2 weeks I have in this town watching you get run off a board you've been better at than anyone who's ever sat on it. I heard my own voice rising and didn't try to bring it down. What time is the vote? 7. Thursday. Why? Because I'm going to be there. Thursday came fast. The board met in the community clubhouse, folding chairs and a coffee urn nobody trusted. And by the time Elena and I walked in together, every chair had a person in it, and every person already knew why. Harold sat at the head table, a folder in front of him thick enough to look official even if it wasn't. Elena, glad you could make it. And Mr. Ross, didn't realize this concerned you directly, but I suppose it does now. It concerns me because you're using my closing as a weapon against a woman who's done nothing but her job, I said, before Elena could answer for herself. That's a strong accusation. It's an accurate one. Harold opened his folder. I'd like the board to review the timeline. Ms. Marsh approved the initial covenant review on the 14th. Mr. Ross's visits to her home appear to have begun shortly after. Say the actual thing instead of building a folder around it, Elena said, standing, steady in a way that made 2 board members sit up straighter. I reviewed that covenant file on the 14th. I approved it because it met every requirement, the same standard I've applied to 40 other closings on this street. If Harold wants to challenge the process, I welcome it. I'll walk this board through every line myself. But he's not challenging the process. He's challenging whether a woman is allowed to have a personal life without her professional judgment being treated as suspect the moment someone notices it. I stood up beside her. I can speak to the timeline too. I've lived on this street 3 years. I've never once seen Elena Marsh bend a rule for anyone, myself included. She fined me $200 for a fence stain in my first month here. If she was inclined to play favorites, that would have been the moment to start. A few people laughed, low and quick, and the room's temperature shifted half a degree in our direction. What's actually happening is a man who's disliked being told no by her for 4 years finally found a reason he thought would stick. It isn't sticking because it isn't true. That's a lot of confidence for someone who won't even be living on this street in 2 weeks, Harold said. I felt Elena go very still beside me, and I understood, standing there, that this wasn't really a fast decision. It had been building for 3 years of fence lines and porch lights and a rosemary plant I'd kept alive without knowing why. Charleston had only ever been the exit I picked before I let myself notice what I already had. I'm not going to Charleston, I said. Daniel, Elena started. I turned down bigger jobs before for worse reasons. I'm not turning down this one for a worse reason. 2 weeks ago I didn't know what I'd be leaving behind. Now I do. I looked at Harold. This isn't about a covenant. It never was. It's about you not liking that the smartest person on this board is a woman who never needed your approval to do her job well. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is she, and you're going to have to find a different photograph. The room was dead silent. Then Mrs. Halloran, near the back, started, unmistakably, to clap. The board chair, Gerald, cleared his throat. I think we can table the recusal question and move to a formal vote on whether Harold's complaint meets the threshold for review. All in favor of dismissing it outright. 6 hands went up out of 7. Outside afterward, under the orange sodium lights of the parking lot, Elena finally spoke. You didn't have to do that. The Charleston thing. I know. You gave up a good job in a room full of near strangers to make a point to Harold Pruitt. I didn't do it for Harold. I did it because somewhere between your kitchen table and that folding chair, I stopped being able to imagine Charleston without picturing what I'd have to leave behind to get there. And I'm done being the guy who leaves before he finds out what he'd have lost. Before I show you what happened after that parking lot, I have to know what you think about the choice Daniel just made. Turning down a good job in front of a room full of near strangers, for something that looked brand new on the surface but had clearly been building for years underneath. Was that brave, or was it reckless? I think there's a real argument on both sides, and honestly, this is exactly the kind of story I love sharing with people who take romance seriously instead of rolling their eyes at it. If that's you, I hope you'll stick around this little corner of the internet because we've got a lot more of these coming. Tell me in the comments. Would you have made the same call Daniel did? Or told him to keep the job and figure the rest out slower? We ended up back at her kitchen table, the same chair I'd fixed now sitting level and solid under me. The coffee this time actually finished brewing before either of us touched it. I need to say something, Elena said. And I need you to let me get all the way through it, because if you interrupt me, I'll lose the nerve. Okay. I've been divorced 2 years. My ex didn't leave because I did anything wrong. Not in the way people usually mean that. He left because I made myself so airtight, so documented, so prepared for every possible way someone could disappoint me, that there was no actual room left for him to just be imperfect around me. He used to say living with me felt like living under review. Her voice didn't waver, but I could hear what it cost her. And the terrifying thing about tonight is that some old part of me is already doing the math. Waiting for the moment you resent me for the Charleston job. Building the file in my head for the day you bring it up in an argument 3 years from now. I don't know how to stop doing that. I've done it my whole life. Then let's not pretend I don't understand it, I said. Bianca didn't leave because of one big thing either. She left because somewhere along the way I stopped fighting for anything, including her, and I got so used to being fine that I forgot fighting was even an option. Tonight in that clubhouse was the first time in longer than I want to admit that I fought for something out loud, where it actually mattered. I reached across the table for her hand. So if you're waiting for the file to start building itself, I understand that. I've got my own fear sitting right next to yours, that I'll go quiet again, that I'll let this get comfortable and stop showing up the way I showed up tonight. I don't have proof that won't happen. I've got 2 weeks of evidence and 1 folding chair full of people who watched me mean it. That's not a lot to build a relationship on. No. So let's not build the whole thing tonight. I turned her hand over in mine. Let's just agree to 2 things. We go slow enough that neither of us pre-writes the ending before we've lived the middle. And whatever happens, we say the true thing to each other instead of the careful thing. Even when it's inconvenient. Elena was quiet for a long moment, turning that over the way she turned over every real decision. Then she got up, came around the table, and settled into my lap, her forehead against mine, her hands finding the collar of my shirt. Slow, she said, and honest. Slow and honest. I can do that. She kissed me then, softer than the one in her kitchen the week before, less about proving something and more about simply choosing it, deliberately with both eyes open. When she pulled back, she was almost smiling. You're going to need somewhere to actually live, though. You can't keep the boxes packed in your truck forever, waiting to see if this works. I was thinking I'd unpack them. In the house you were selling? In whichever house has room for a wobbly chair that needs fixing every couple of years. So I've got a reason to keep coming back to it. She laughed, quiet and real, and pressed her palm flat against my chest like she was checking the moment was as solid as it felt. The unpacking took longer than either of us expected, mostly because Elena kept finding reasons to wander over, just to supervise. Which mostly meant sitting on my porch steps critiquing my box labeling system while I hauled furniture through the door. You've got kitchen written on 4 different boxes, she said. And none of them actually have kitchen things in them. I was in a hurry. I thought I was leaving the state. You were leaving the state to spite a chair leg you'd already fixed for me. I've decided that's the most Daniel thing I've ever heard. We spent 3 weekends turning my half-empty house back into an actual home, and somewhere in the middle of the second one she showed up with a terracotta pot and a rosemary cutting from her own windowsill plant, roots still damp, wrapped in a wet paper towel. For the new kitchen, she said, since you apparently know how to keep one alive. I put it on my windowsill that afternoon, and it sat there through the fall, through the first real cold snap, through the specific chaos of 2 people who'd spent years being careful on their own terms, figuring out how to be careless together without keeping score. The community fall festival landed in October, the whole street turning out for chili and a raffle Elena ran with the same rigor she brought to Covenant reviews. I spent the afternoon fixing the wobbly leg on the dunk tank platform before some kid's father put his back into it and put himself in the water early. And when he did anyway, soaked and laughing, Elena caught my eye across the lawn and mouthed, "You missed one," and I realized I didn't mind being wrong in front of the whole street nearly as much as I used to. "You can't fix everything, you know?" she said later, handing me a bowl of chili I hadn't asked for but was grateful for. "I can fix the things I notice. I notice a lot of things now. That's new. You're a bad influence." The hard day came in November. Elena's father had a fall 2 towns over. Nothing catastrophic, a cracked wrist and a scare, but enough that she spent 4 straight days running between his house, the hospital, and her own job, wearing herself down to nothing in the process of being thorough about everyone except herself. I found her on her porch at midnight on the 4th day, still in her work clothes, staring at nothing. "You should have called me," I said, sitting beside her. "I didn't want to be someone who needs help with everything. You're not that. You're someone who's allowed to need help with one thing one time, without it meaning you failed at being independent." I didn't try to fix it with more words than that. I just sat with her until she leaned into my shoulder, until the tension in her started to unwind on its own timeline. The next morning I drove her father's prescriptions across town before she woke up, sat with him for an hour so she could shower and eat something that wasn't vending machine coffee, and when she found out, she didn't thank me right away. She just looked at me for a long moment and said, "I'm still learning how to let that happen without flinching." Which was, from Elena, its own kind of thank you. We fought exactly once that fall over something stupid. I'd rearranged her binders on the entry table without asking, trying to be helpful, and she came home to find her color-coded system alphabetized instead of chronological, which apparently mattered more than I understood. "You don't get to reorganize the one system that actually makes sense to me," she said, sharper than she meant to be, I could tell, but sharp anyway. "I was trying to help. I didn't ask for help with that." She pressed her fingers to her temple. "It's not really about the binders, Daniel. It's about control. Every time something in my life gets rearranged without warning, some old part of me goes back to the version of myself who came home from her marriage and found half the furniture already gone. I know that's not what you did. I know it. But knowing it and feeling it aren't the same thing yet. We didn't resolve it that night. We both went to bed frustrated, which neither of us liked, and in the morning she found me at her table putting the binders back exactly the way they'd been, chronological, patient, undoing my own well-meant mess one folder at a time. "I should have asked first," I said. "I'm sorry. I overreacted. And I told you why, which is more than I usually manage. I'm working on it. We're both working on things. That's the deal we made." She nodded, and that was the whole repair. No grand gesture, just 2 people choosing honesty over being right, exactly like they'd promised each other in her kitchen weeks earlier. Harold surfaced one more time in December, a petty complaint about holiday lighting exceeding the Covenant's allowance, aimed squarely at my house. But this time the board didn't need Elena to defend herself at all. Gerald handled it in a 2-line email, citing precedent, closing the matter before it reached a vote. Harold resigned from the board in January, citing time constraints, which everyone understood to mean he'd finally run out of road. "You know what's strange?" Elena said the night the resignation email went out. "I spent 4 years afraid of a man who turned out to have nothing behind the folder at all. That's usually how it works with people like Harold. I know that now. I didn't know it before you." 18 months later, the rosemary plant had outgrown its second pot, thick and unruly, spilling green over the windowsill in a way that made the leggy, uncertain cutting Elena had brought over that first fall looked like a different plant entirely. We'd repotted it twice. It had survived one bad frost when I forgot to bring it in, one overwatering when Elena decided she knew better than the plant tag, and it had kept growing anyway, stubborn in a way that felt, by then, like it belonged to both of us instead of either one of us alone. Elena had made board chair by then, running meetings with the same rigor and half again as much warmth as she'd had the day I met her on her own porch. I'd taken on the restoration work after all, just local, old houses around the county, reading their bones the way I'd once told her I could, except now I came home every night instead of imagining a version of my life 3 states away. I proposed on her porch, the same one I'd stood on with my keys still in my hand the day I told her I was leaving. I'd asked Tyler to make himself scarce that evening, which he'd agreed to with the particular eye roll of a teenager who'd clearly known exactly what was coming for months. "You're going to think this is nerdy?" I told her, kneeling on the same boards Harold had once stood on with his folder, a small cutting of the rosemary plant in a tiny clay pot in my other hand instead of a ring box. "Try me. I brought you a piece of the plant you gave me, because I wanted you to have proof it survives. That whatever we plant together keeps growing even through the seasons that scare us." I opened my jacket pocket instead, where a different piece of paper had once sat. "So here's the simple version. I don't want to be the guy who almost left before he found out what he'd have lost. I want to be the guy who stayed and built something anyway. Marry me, Elena." She didn't answer right away. Some habits stay with a person no matter how far they come. But when she did, her voice had none of the boardroom left in it at all. "Yes, obviously yes. You didn't even need the plant, Daniel. I know. I just wanted you to have something that proves it. There's something I want to say before I let this story end, because if you've stayed with Daniel and Elena this far, you already understand it better than I could explain it. This wasn't a story about a big rescue or one dramatic gesture that fixed everything overnight. It was about 2 careful people slowly choosing to stop being careful with each other, one shim under a wobbly chair leg at a time. If that's the kind of love story that actually stays with you, the quiet, patient, "I noticed you before I let myself say so" kind, then I think you're exactly the person this channel was built for, and I'd love for you to stick around for the next one. Tell me in the comments, what's the smallest gesture someone's ever done for you that ended up meaning the most? I have a feeling the answers are going to be better than anything I could write. And if this story found you at the right moment, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Elena still keeps binders on the entry table, chronological now, my one small victory. I still keep the rosemary alive on the windowsill, watered on a schedule she pretends not to check. And some nights, when the house is quiet and the porch light is on for no reason at all except that we like leaving it on, I think about the day I stood on her steps with my keys in my hand, ready to drive 3 states away from the best thing that had ever been 2 doors down from me the whole time, and how she stopped me with 7 words I've never once regretted hearing. "Not before you hear this."